Hi, welcome to Dig Into China. I'm Dong Shong. Today, the biggest concern for ordinary Chinese citizens is the housing pension system. Yes, you heard it right, a pension system for housing. First, it's crucial to understand that when the Chinese government launches a new system as a pilot program, it means that it has received a clear approval from at least the Politburo Standing Committee level. Given the current political climate in China, where admitting mistake is not an option, this initiative is set in stone and cannot be reversed. On August 23rd, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development announced a pilot program for the housing pension system, starting trials in 22 major cities, including Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou. These cities cover nearly all of China's first and second tier cities and contribute more than 100% to the nation's fiscal revenue. In contrast, third tier and lower tier cities which struggle with financial hardship are seen as having little value by the central government. As a result, the nationwide implementation of the housing pension system is inevitable. It is anticipated that within the next year, the system will be rolled out across all of China with no exceptions as long as the current government remains in power. Details about the housing pension system have been gradually coming to light in recent days. Its origins are linked to the owner-built housing collapse in Changsha on April 29, 2022. The building, originally 5 stories tall with significant quality issues, was inspected by a certification agency in Changsha after the owner allegedly paid a bribe. The agency certified the building as structurally sound. However, the owner then expanded the building to 8 stories for use as a hotel, far surpassing the building's structural load capacity, which ultimately led to the collapse. Within a month, on May 24, 2022, the State Council released the Notice on Printing and Distributing the National Special Rectification Work Plan for Self-Built Housing Safety, launching a nationwide 100-day comprehensive inspection of self-built housing quality, known as the 100-day action. This response was expected following the major accident, and it did not draw much public attention. Interesting, the notice from the State Council also introduced a provision that seemed unrelated to the quality inspection work: the establishment of a long-term mechanism to improve mandatory housing quality standards and the exploration of systems for regular housing inspections, housing pensions, and housing quality insurance. At that time, the document was lost in the sea of government paperwork and went largely unnoticed. No one realized its significance. What appeared to be a casual mention of a long-term mechanism and new systems in a routine national inspection notice issued by the State Council's General Office after a major accident has unexpectedly become the foundation for new policies. This will have a profound impact on every individual in China. In March 2023, 15 departments, including the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development and the National Development and Reform Commission and the Ministry of Finance, jointly issued the Notice on Strengthening the Safety Management of Commercial Self-Built Housing. This notice primarily emphasized the monitoring of self-built housing quality. It requires property owners to perform self-inspections, while local governments are instructed to establish a grid-based management system for self-built properties. Moreover, stringent quality controls are mandated for self-built properties used for commercial purpose. The notice also went largely unnoticed. At the time, few paid attention to the small detail hidden within the document, which called for improving regulatory systems, actively exploring innovative methods for housing safety management, and piloting regular housing inspections, housing pensions, and housing quality insurance. The aim was to gather innovative practices enhancing house safety management and expedite development of local regulations. It's important to emphasize that until this point, all measures were specifically targeting self-built housing. Both documents focused on quality issues within the particular category of construction. In reality, this sector is fraught with problems. Both the rural and urban self-built housing face significant issues with approval, construction, renovation, and the rental, all of which are major areas of corruption. The central issue is that self-built housing owners are private individuals rather than businesses, and that they lack any professional qualifications. China's existing legal framework does not provide strict and systemic guidelines on how individual owners should be held responsible for the quality of their buildings. The fundamental issue is that while buildings may seem like permanent structures, they are essentially consumables. Materials such as steel and concrete deteriorate over time, and elements like doors, windows, and elevators require ongoing maintenance and repairs. In everyday use, property owners are expected to monitor the quality of their buildings. However, most owners lack the ability to effectively oversee this and are unable to fulfill this responsibility. After the self-built housing collapse in Changsha, many hoped the Chinese government would address these legal shortcomings. Surprisingly, the government showed little interest in fixing the legal gaps in self-built housing. Instead, it focused on the long-standing trillion yuan property maintenance fund from apartment buildings built by commercial construction companies, proposing to convert it into a housing pension managed by the government. Yes, you read that right. The issues with self-built housing are ultimately being shifted to commercial apartment buildings. This reflects the absurd logic behind the entire situation. What is self-built housing? It involves rural villages and urban residents acquiring land and constructing their own homes for personal use. On the other hand, commercial apartment buildings are developed by developers who buy land and build properties to sell as commercial products to the general public. These two types of housing are fundamentally different and cannot be equated in terms of area. Self-built housing and commercial apartment buildings each account for approximately 20 billion square meters of China's urban and rural residential stock. Additionally, there are around 10 billion square meters of state enterprise-funded housing. This type of housing involves state-owned enterprises collecting funds from employees to build residential properties, which are then allocated to those employees. This practice has continued and remains a primary method for addressing housing needs among government officials in Beijing. Combined, these three types of housing total 50 billion square meters. Here is an important point. Out of these 50 billion square meters, the 20 billion square meters of commercial apartment buildings have had their buyers contribute to a special maintenance fund. This fund is deposited into designated accounts and is specifically for the repair and the renovation of shared areas and common facilities. Note the terms shared areas and common facilities. This means that repairs to privately owned parts of the property, such as windows in your own room, cannot use this maintenance fund. For properties that are entirely privately owned, such as self-built houses in rural and urban areas, the entire building is privately owned with no shared areas. Therefore, owners of self-built housing typically do not need to contribute to a special maintenance fund. Since the responsibility for maintaining the entire building rests solely with the owner, paying into a designated maintenance fund would be pointless. If repairs are needed, the owner must cover the costs themselves. The absurdity of the situation is now evident. The government should be concentrating on resolving the issues with self-built housing, which have no direct connection to commercial apartment buildings. Instead, using the Changsha self-built housing collapse as a pretext, the State Council has directed the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development to establish a housing pension system. At first, this concept was puzzling and its purpose was unclear. However, on August 24th, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development finally unveiled the details of the scheme. The housing pension system mandates that all property owners, whether of commercial or self-built housing contributed to a special maintenance fund. The government will also add some funds, and the local governments will oversee the combined resources. This system allows for broader allocation of funds, not restricted to the needs of individual self-built property owners, specific buildings, or particular neighborhoods. To provide some context, China's commercial housing market began to develop around the year 2000 and has expanded significantly over time. By 2023, approximately 20 billion square meters of commercial housing had been completed, with over half of this area finishing construction and inspection after 2013. Generally, commercial properties are still relatively new and major repairs are relatively infrequent. The contribution standards for the Commercial Housing Maintenance Fund differ by region, typically ranging from 200 to 500 yuan per square meter. For simplicity, let's use an average of 300 yuan per square meters, which is likely to be a conservative estimate. Based on this, the 20 billion square meters of commercial housing have accumulated approximately 6 trillion yuan in maintenance funds, most of which remains unspent. Inspection results from various regions indicate that by the end of 2022, the withdrawal rate of Beijing's commercial residential maintenance funds was below 10%, and the Shandong's was only 3.3%. Using a conservative estimate of a 10% withdrawal rate, this means that out of 6 billion yuan in maintenance fund, at least 90% or 5.4 trillion yuan remains unused. This large sum, especially in times of declining fiscal revenues, is incredibly tempting. The government, facing a significant drop in income, finds this stagnant money in bank accounts highly alluring. Next, we have the 10 billion square meters of state enterprise funded housing. These properties are generally quite old, averaging around 20 years. The construction process for these buildings lacked the rigorous oversight seen in commercial housing, leading to significant corruption and poor building quality. Although maintenance funds were paid for these properties, most of these funds have already been exhausted. Requiring government employees from state-owned enterprises to make additional contributions to the maintenance fund is nearly impossible, akin to extracting teeth from a tiger. If state enterprise funded housing is not properly repaired and maintained, the risk of widespread building collapse looms large. The State Council, familiar with the challenges because its members also reside in such units, has devised a solution. They have taken advantage of the self-built housing collapse to propose a housing pension system that reallocates over 5 trillion yuan in unused maintenance fund from commercial properties. The essence of the housing pension system lies in centralized government management. With over 5 trillion yuan in maintenance funds from commercial properties largely untouched and the state enterprise funded housing in urgent need of repair, the solution is to consolidate these funds. Under the pretext of centralized management, even projects like demolishing and rebuilding state enterprise funded housing as luxury residence can be deemed acceptable as renovations. This setup is entirely justified as the funds are sourced from commercial property owners and benefit state officials. No officials will face scrutiny for this arrangement, as challenging it would place one against the entire bureaucratic system, potentially leading to severe consequences. The core of the housing pension system is that owners of 20 billion square meters of commercial housing are essentially funding the housing needs of government employees living in 10 billion square meters of state enterprise funded housing, allowing them to enjoy comfortable and improved living conditions. Recently, the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development claimed that the government would also contribute to the housing pension system. However, this claim should be dismissed as false. It is contrary to the Chinese government's historical approach. Even in times of fiscal surplus, the government did not allocate funds directly to benefit the public. Now, with a drastic reduction in fiscal revenue, taxes down 5% and the land sales revenue halved, and with both central and the local governments needing to issue around 800 billion yuan in bonds each month to balance the budget, it is inconceivable that the government would use its funds to benefit the citizens directly. What's even more outrageous is that the housing pension system was inserted into a notice on self-built housing quality supervision. To justify this move, the Chinese government will now have to collect maintenance funds from owners of 20 billion square meters of self-built housing. Even at a modest rate of 250 yuan per square meter, this amounts to a staggering 5 trillion yuan. This massive fund is so substantial that it could lead the entire government system to act with complete disregard for ethics and propriety. Owners of self-built housing, whether in rural or urban areas, are already fully responsible for their property's quality. They generally pay for repairs out of their own pockets, and the self-built homes do not involve shared parts or shared facilities like commercial buildings do. Consequently, self-building house typically doesn't require maintenance funds. Now, the Communist Party wants these owners to contribute a significant amount to the centralized housing pension system. After making these payments, who will be responsible for maintaining the property? Will the responsibility shift from individual owners to the government? Will the government handle routine maintenance and repairs? If a window breaks, will owners need to report to the government to get funds for repair? If there is a future collapse of self-built housing, will the owner be absolved of responsibility, and will the head of the Housing and Urban Rural Development Bureau be held accountable? This entire scenario is completely illogical. To summarize, the essence of the housing pension system involves two significant sums of 5 trillion yuan each, one from the maintenance funds of commercial housing owners and the other from the contributions expected from self-built housing owners. Altogether, this 10 trillion yuan will no longer be managed by individual owners, but it will be controlled by the government. This fund will be used at the government's discretion, potentially for various purposes, including addressing the pressing needs of outdated government-funded housing for officials. This substantial 10 trillion yuan is the primary driving force behind the government's rapid implementation of the housing pension pilot program. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my videos to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.